A new beginning. Lila Grant stepped into Greenwood Medical Center with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The bustling atmosphere was a stark contrast to her previous experiences in smaller clinics, where she had felt more at home. As she adjusted her scrubs and took a deep breath, she was determined to make a positive impression on her first day. The air was filled with the scent of antiseptic and the sounds of medical equipment beeping in rhythm with the heartbeats of patients being cared for by dedicated staff members. Lila walked towards the nurse's station, her heart racing with anticipation and anxiety. She had worked hard to earn this position, graduating at the top of her class from nursing school, but she was acutely aware that she would have to prove herself in an environment that often valued tradition over change. As she approached the station, she noticed several nurses exchanging glances and whispers that faded into silence as she drew near. It was an unsettling feeling that made her stomach churn. She had hoped for camaraderie but sensed an undercurrent of judgment instead. "Excuse me," Lila said, summoning her courage to speak up despite her nerves. "I'm Lila Grant, the new nurse starting today. Can someone direct me to the head nurse's office?" A tall blonde nurse looked up from her paperwork, her blue eyes widening slightly before settling back into a mask of professionalism that felt all too rehearsed. "Sure," she replied coolly, "it's down the hall, third door on your right." Lila nodded, forcing a smile as she made her way down the corridor, each step echoing like a drumbeat in her ears. She could feel eyes on her, some curious, others critical, as if they were assessing whether she belonged there or not. As she neared the head nurse's office, an imposing figure emerged from one of the nearby rooms, a distinguished man in a white coat with salt and pepper hair that spoke of years of experience and authority in the medical field. "Good morning," Lila greeted him warmly, hoping to make a connection. "Dr. Samuel Hayes," he replied curtly without returning her smile or extending his hand for a shake. "I trust you've been properly oriented to our protocols?" "Yes, Dr. Hayes," Lila responded, trying to maintain eye contact despite his piercing gaze that seemed to scrutinize every inch of her. "Good," he said dismissively before walking past her without another word. Lila felt deflated by his lack of warmth but pushed through it. She was there to do a job and prove herself capable no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The head nurse's office turned out to be just as intimidating as Dr. Hayes had been. Nurse Patricia Lynn, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue, wasted no time in outlining expectations for Lila's first day. "We have high standards here at Greenwood," Nurse Lynn stated firmly as Lila took a seat across from her desk cluttered with charts and medical supplies. "I expect you to keep up." Lila nodded earnestly. She had faced challenges before and was ready to tackle whatever came her way. As the day progressed, however, it became clear that Greenwood Medical Center was not going to be an easy place for Lila to navigate. She found herself assigned tasks that were far more challenging than those given to her colleagues, who seemed to breeze through their shifts while she struggled under the weight of disproportionate responsibilities. "Lila," called out Dr. Finch later that morning from across the nurse's station, his tone dripping with condescension as he gestured for her attention. "I hope you've familiarized yourself with our protocols by now. We can't afford any mistakes." The emphasis he placed on mistakes sent a chill down her spine as she met his gaze evenly, refusing to show any sign of intimidation despite how belittling his words felt. "Of course, Dr. Finch," Lila replied steadily, determined not to let him see how much his words affected her. Throughout the morning rounds, it became increasingly evident that Dr. Finch took particular pleasure in finding fault with Lila's work, no matter how diligently she performed her duties or how well she adhered to hospital protocols. "Lila," he called again later in the day after observing her interacting with patients in room 204, an elderly woman who had been admitted for heart surgery but was now recovering well under Lila's care. "I noticed you didn't check Mrs. Jenkins' chart before administering medication," he said loudly enough for nearby staff members to hear him clearly. "I did check it," Lila replied calmly but firmly, feeling frustration bubbling beneath the surface as whispers began circulating around them. Dr. Finch raised an eyebrow mockingly before smirking slightly as if enjoying this public display of power over her, a power he wielded far too easily. "Let's hope you can maintain that level of attention with all your patients," he said before walking away with an air of superiority that left Lila feeling humiliated yet resolute. As she continued through her shift, Lila couldn't shake off the feeling that every small mistake would be magnified under scrutiny simply because of who she was, a young black woman trying to carve out a space in an institution steeped in tradition and often resistant to change. By the time lunch rolled around, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, not just from physical labor but also from emotional fatigue stemming from constant microaggressions and dismissive remarks from colleagues who seemed determined to undermine her confidence at every turn. Sitting alone in the break room while others chatted animatedly nearby made it painfully clear just how isolated she felt within this new environment, an outsider looking in rather than part of a cohesive team working towards common goals. Just then, Mr. Thompson, a patient recovering from surgery, entered the break room looking for something cold to drink from the vending machine located against one wall. "Hey there," he greeted warmly upon spotting Lila seated at one of the tables alone. "Hi." Lila replied, genuinely surprised by his friendliness amidst all this tension surrounding her work life lately. "You're new here?" he asked curiously while selecting his drink from within its glass confines before joining her at the table where they could talk more comfortably without anyone else around listening in on their conversation about hospital politics or gossiping behind closed doors about who deserved what position based solely on race rather than meritocracy alone. Yes, Lila admitted sheepishly but proudly nonetheless about having gotten this far despite everything stacked against them both, her being black while he happened to not only being white but also wealthy enough not needing insurance coverage during recovery times like most people did nowadays. "Well, welcome aboard," Mr. Thompson said, enthusiastically raising his can towards hers before taking a sip himself while leaning back against his chair casually as if they were old friends catching up rather than strangers meeting for first time ever. "I hope things settle down soon because I can tell already it's going to be tough ride ahead." Lila couldn't help but smile back at him, feeling grateful someone understood what it meant being thrown into deep end without proper lifeguard present ready assist when needed most desperately. Little did either realize just how intertwined their fates would become over next few weeks, filled with challenges yet also opportunities leading towards unexpected transformations within both lives, ultimately changing everything forever. The unseen battle. The following weeks at St. Mary's General Hospital unfolded like a slow-burning fuse, each day adding another layer of tension to Angela Parker's already challenging work environment. The initial coolness she had experienced on her first day had evolved into a more insidious form of exclusion, one that was harder to pinpoint but impossible to ignore. As Angela made her morning rounds, she couldn't help but notice the stark difference in how she was treated compared to her white colleagues. Dr. William Greaves, in particular, seemed to take a perverse pleasure in finding fault with her work, no matter how diligently she performed her duties. "Angela," he called out one morning from across the busy nurses' station, his voice carrying over the din of conversation and medical equipment. "I hope you've familiarized yourself with our protocols by now. We can't afford any mistakes." The emphasis he placed on the word mistakes sent a chill down Angela's spine. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Of course, Dr. Greaves," Angela replied, her voice steady despite the weight of his scrutiny. "I assure you I'm fully versed in all hospital procedures." Dr. Greaves raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "We'll see about that, won't we? Let's hope you learned everything you need to hear." The barely veiled condescension in his tone was not lost on Angela nor on the other nurses who pretended to be busy with their tasks while obviously eavesdropping. As Dr. Greaves walked away, Angela could feel the weight of unspoken judgments pressing down on her. Throughout the day, she found herself assigned to the most challenging and undesirable tasks while her white colleagues were given relatively straightforward cases. It was as if someone had decided that she needed to prove herself beyond any reasonable doubt. "Angela, would you mind taking Mr. Johnson in room 305, a fellow nurse asked her, her voice sickly sweet. He's been a bit challenging today. Angela nodded, knowing full well that challenging was an understatement. Mr. Johnson was known for his racist outbursts and had already driven 2 nurses to tears that week. Yet Angela approached the task with unwavering professionalism, determined to prove her worth. As she entered Mr. Johnson's room, bracing herself for the inevitable tirade, she couldn't help but wonder if this assignment was just another way to test her resolve, or worse, to set her up for failure. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Johnson spat as soon as he saw her. "I told them I don't want no colored nurse touching me." Taking a deep breath, Angela steeled herself against the onslaught of hateful words. "Mr. Johnson," she said calmly but firmly, "I'm here to check your vitals and change your dressing. I assure you I'm more than qualified to provide your care." As she worked, enduring a constant stream of racial slurs and insults, Angela maintained her composure. She completed her tasks with precision and care, refusing to let Mr. Johnson's bigotry affect the quality of her work. When she finally emerged from the room, Angela found Dr. Greaves waiting in the hallway with a look of feigned concern on his face. "Everything all right in there, Nurse Parker?" "We heard quite a commotion." Angela met his gaze evenly. "Mr. Johnson's vitals are stable and his dressing has been changed," she replied coolly. "Is there anything else you need from me?" For a moment, surprise flickered across Dr. Greaves' face before it was quickly replaced by his usual mask of condescension. "Well, let's hope you can maintain that level of composure with all your patients," he said mockingly as he walked away. Angela couldn't shake the feeling that she had just passed some sort of test, one that she should never have been subjected to in the first place. The rest of Angela's shift passed in a blur of endless tasks and subtle slights. She found herself constantly having to double-check her work, not because she doubted her abilities but because she knew that even the smallest mistake would be magnified and used against her. As the day wore on, Angela couldn't help but notice how her white colleagues seemed to breeze through their shifts, chatting and laughing, while she struggled under the weight of her disproportionate workload. The inequality was glaring. Every time she considered speaking up about it, however, the memory of her mother's words held her back, "Don't you dare let them see you falter." By the time her shift ended, Angela was physically and emotionally drained as she gathered her things from her locker. She overheard 2 nurses whispering nearby, "Can you believe they're making such a big deal about diversity hires?" one said disdainfully. "It's not like they can keep up with the rest of us anyway," the other replied. Angela's hand froze on her locker door, her heart pounded in her chest as anger surged within her. She wanted nothing more than to confront them, to defend herself and her abilities, but she knew any such confrontation would only serve to reinforce their prejudices instead. Quietly closing her locker door, Angela made her way out of the hospital with her head held high despite the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. As Angela waited at the bus stop, the same sleek black Mercedes she had seen before pulled up beside her. Dr. Greaves was behind the wheel again. "Nurse Parker," he called out mockingly from inside his car, "waiting for the bus again? Such a shame, looks like that's all you can afford on a nurse's salary, isn't it?" Before Angela could respond, her mind racing with retorts, Dr. Greaves sped away, leaving her standing there humiliated and angry once more. The casual cruelty of his words cut deep. They served as a stark reminder of the uphill battle she faced every day at St. Mary's General Hospital. As she boarded the bus later that evening, Angela's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The excitement and hope she had felt when she first started were now overshadowed by frustration and despair over how things had unfolded since then. Yet beneath it all simmered an ember of resilience, a fierce determination not only to survive but also to thrive despite these challenges. The next morning brought another round of trials as Angela prepared for yet another shift at St. Mary's General Hospital, a place where every interaction felt like navigating through a minefield filled with prejudice and bias hidden behind forced smiles and polite nods. However, unbeknownst to Angela or anyone else within those sterile walls, Thomas Edwards watched silently from his hospital bed as tensions mounted around him. He wasn't just any patient but rather someone whose presence could change everything for everyone involved. A moment of truth. The following week at St. Mary's General Hospital was a pivotal one for Angela Parker. Each day felt like a test, with Dr. William Greaves and her colleagues scrutinizing her every move, but Angela was determined not to let their prejudice define her. She was there to provide care, and she would do so with unwavering professionalism, regardless of the obstacles in her path. As Angela settled into her routine, she began to notice the patterns of exclusion that permeated the hospital culture. The whispers and side glances were no longer just background noise, they were a constant reminder of the divide that existed between her and her colleagues. The other nurses would often gather in groups, laughing and sharing stories, while Angela was left to navigate her duties alone. She felt like an outsider in a world that should have embraced her as a fellow caregiver. One afternoon, as she prepared to take her lunch break, Angela overheard two nurses discussing an upcoming staff meeting. "I heard they're going to address the diversity issue," one said with a scoff. "As if that's going to change anything around here. Right? It's all just talk," the other replied dismissively. "They'll never really accept someone like her." Angela's heart sank at their words, but instead of retreating into despair, she felt a flicker of determination ignite within her. She had come too far to let their ignorance deter her from her purpose. Later that day, Angela was assigned to care for Mr. Johnson again. She braced herself for another round of verbal abuse, knowing full well that he had already driven two nurses away with his racist tirades. As she entered his room, she steeled herself for the worst. "What do you want?" Mr. Johnson barked as soon as he saw her. "I told them I don't want you here." "Mr. Johnson," Angela said firmly but calmly, "I'm here to check your vitals and provide the care you need. I assure you I am fully qualified." As she proceeded with her tasks, Mr. Johnson unleashed a torrent of insults, calling her names and belittling her abilities, yet Angela maintained her composure. She focused on the task at hand, refusing to let his words penetrate the wall of professionalism she had built around herself. However, just as she finished taking his vitals and began changing his dressing, Mr. Johnson's demeanor shifted unexpectedly. He paused mid-insult, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face more closely. "Wait a minute," he said slowly, as if realizing something for the first time. "You're not just some random nurse." Angela raised an eyebrow but kept silent, unsure of where this was headed. "You're one of those diversity hires, aren't you?" he sneered. Before she could respond, Mr. Johnson continued, "I bet you think you're special because they gave you this job." Angela took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anger and sadness wash over her. "I earned this position through hard work and dedication," she replied evenly. "I'm here to do my job just like everyone else." Mr. Johnson scoffed but then seemed to hesitate again, as if something was stirring within him, a flicker of recognition perhaps. Just then, Dr. Greaves entered the room without knocking. "Everything all right in here?" he asked casually, his eyes darting between Angela and Mr. Johnson. "Just peachy," Mr. Johnson retorted sarcastically before turning back to Angela with renewed venom in his voice. "You think you can handle this? You're nothing but a charity case." Dr. Greaves raised an eyebrow at Angela but didn't intervene. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe with an air of amusement as if enjoying the spectacle unfolding before him. Angela felt the heat rise in her cheeks but refused to back down. "I'm not here because of charity," she said firmly. "I'm here because I'm qualified and capable." Mr. Johnson laughed mockingly but then abruptly stopped when he noticed something in Angela's eyes, a fierce determination that caught him off guard. For a moment, silence filled the room as they locked eyes. Angela's unwavering gaze met Mr. Johnson's incredulous stare, and in that instant, something shifted within him. "You think you can change things around here?" he asked quietly, almost contemplatively now. "I believe I can make a difference," Angela replied confidently. Dr. Greaves shifted uncomfortably at this exchange. It was clear that he hadn't expected such resilience from Angela or any pushback from Mr. Johnson. Let's hope you can maintain that level of composure with all your patients, Dr. Greaves finally interjected dismissively before turning to leave the room. As he walked away, Mr. Johnson looked at Angela with newfound respect, or perhaps it was begrudging admiration. "You've got guts," he admitted reluctantly. "I'm just doing my job," Angela replied softly but firmly. When she left Mr. Johnson's room later that day, something felt different within her, a sense of empowerment that had been missing since she started at St. Mary's General Hospital. The next few days passed in relative calm compared to the previous weeks, while there were still moments of exclusion from some colleagues and subtle digs from Dr. Greaves. Angela felt more resolute than ever before. Her interactions with patients became increasingly rewarding. They appreciated her kindness and expertise while also recognizing the challenges she faced within the hospital walls. One evening, after finishing up a particularly long shift filled with positive patient interactions, Angela found herself sitting alone in the break room when Thomas Edwards approached her table hesitantly. "Mind if I join you?" he asked softly. Angela looked up from her phone and smiled warmly at him. Thomas had been recovering from surgery for several days now and had always been polite during their interactions. "Of course," she replied invitingly as he took a seat across from her. "I've been watching you work," Thomas said thoughtfully after a moment's pause. "You handle yourself really well despite everything going on around you." Angela chuckled lightly at his compliment but quickly became serious again. There was something about Thomas that intrigued her, something deeper than just being another patient recovering in bed nearby. "Thank you," she said sincerely before adding cautiously, "it hasn't been easy." "I can imagine," Thomas replied thoughtfully before leaning closer slightly as if sharing a secret between friends now rather than patient-nurse dynamics alone. "I know what it feels like, to be judged based on things outside your control," he continued quietly after glancing around them, first ensuring no one else could hear their conversation happening right now. Angela nodded understandingly. It was refreshing talking openly about these issues without fear or judgment looming over them both. "You have strength though," Thomas added encouragingly after noticing how resiliently she faced each challenge thrown at her daily. "Thank you," Angela said softly, again feeling grateful for having someone recognize what it took just getting through each day intact. Little did either realize how intertwined their fates would become over these next few weeks, filled with challenges yet also opportunities leading towards unexpected transformations within both lives, ultimately changing everything forever. The ripple effect. The days turned into weeks, and Angela Parker found herself entrenched in a battle that was both exhausting and illuminating. Each shift at St. Mary's General Hospital felt like a microcosm of a larger struggle, a struggle not just for her own dignity but for the recognition and respect of all those who had come before her. As she navigated the complexities of her role, she became increasingly aware of the ripple effects her presence was creating within the institution. Angela's interactions with patients continued to be a source of strength. She had developed a rapport with many of them, often being the only one who took the time to listen to their concerns or offer words of encouragement. Her ability to connect with patients was evident, and it did not go unnoticed by everyone in the hospital. One afternoon, as Angela was attending to Mrs. Roberts, an elderly woman recovering from hip surgery, she noticed Thomas Edwards watching from his bed across the room. He had been admitted for a routine procedure but had quickly become a silent observer of the hospital dynamics. Thomas had seen Angela's struggles, and he admired her resilience in the face of adversity. "Angela," Mrs. Roberts said softly, "you're doing a wonderful job. I've seen how hard you work, and I appreciate it." "Thank you, Mrs. Roberts," Angela replied, her heart warming at the compliment. "It means a lot to me." As she finished up with Mrs. Roberts, Thomas called out to her. "You've got a gift, Angela. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Angela smiled at him, grateful for his support. "I appreciate that, Mr. Edwards. It helps to have people who understand." However, not everyone shared this sentiment. Dr. Greaves seemed increasingly agitated by Angela's growing rapport with patients. He had always been dismissive of her abilities, but now he appeared to be actively undermining her efforts. One day, during morning rounds, he made a point of highlighting every small mistake she made in front of their colleagues. "Angela," he said loudly as they entered room 210 where Mr. Johnson lay recovering from surgery, "I hope you remember that patient care is paramount here. We wouldn't want any accidents, would we?" The implication hung heavy in the air as Mr. Johnson glared at Angela from his bed. It was an attempt to belittle her in front of both patients and staff alike, a tactic that was becoming all too familiar. "Of course not, Dr. Greaves," Angela replied evenly, refusing to let his words rattle her. Mr. Johnson's expression shifted slightly, perhaps he saw something in Angela that intrigued him beyond his usual prejudices. "You think you can handle this?" he asked unexpectedly, his tone less hostile than before. "I'm here to provide care," Angela said firmly, maintaining eye contact with him while suppressing any feelings of intimidation from Dr. Greaves' presence. After Dr. Greaves left the room with an air of superiority, Mr. Johnson looked at Angela with a mix of confusion and curiosity. "You really believe you can make a difference here?" Angela nodded earnestly. "I do believe that change is possible, even if it starts with small steps." The conversation lingered in Mr. Johnson's mind long after Angela left the room. He began to question his own biases and whether they were truly justified. Meanwhile, word began to spread among the patients about Angela's dedication and compassion. Her ability to listen and connect was making waves beyond what she could see within the walls of St. Mary's General Hospital. One day during lunch break, as Angela sat quietly reading through patient charts in the break room, she overheard two nurses discussing her. "Have you heard about Nurse Parker?" one whispered incredulously. "She actually cares about her patients," the other replied with disdain. "It's ridiculous how much attention she gets for doing what we're all supposed to do," the first nurse scoffed. Angela felt a pang of hurt but also a sense of resolve. She wouldn't let their negativity define her experience any longer. That afternoon, as she returned to work after her break, she found herself unexpectedly confronted by Thomas Edwards in the hallway. "Angela," he called out as he approached her with purpose. "Yes," she replied curiously. "I've been thinking about what you said, the idea of making a difference," Thomas began hesitantly before continuing more confidently, "I want to help." Angela raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Help? How?" "I have some connections outside this hospital, people who can help bring attention to what's happening here," Thomas explained earnestly. Angela felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Could they really make an impact together? "What do you have in mind?" Thomas smiled knowingly as they began brainstorming ideas, ways they could leverage his connections to shine a light on the issues within St. Mary's General Hospital while also advocating for better treatment and respect for all staff members regardless of race or background. As their conversation deepened over the next few days, Thomas shared stories about his own experiences in navigating systemic barriers throughout his life. Angela felt empowered by their shared vision for change. In one particularly pivotal moment during their discussions together, Thomas revealed something unexpected. "You know, I'm not just any patient here," he said quietly after pausing thoughtfully for effect before continuing, "I'm actually part owner of this hospital." Angela blinked in disbelief. This revelation changed everything. "You mean, you have influence?" she stammered incredulously. "More than you realize," Thomas replied with conviction as determination shone brightly within his eyes. With newfound purpose igniting within them both, they began crafting plans that would challenge long-held prejudices while exposing toxic workplace dynamics lurking behind pristine facades throughout St. Mary's General Hospital. As they laid out their strategy over coffee breaks and whispered conversations during shifts, their bond grew stronger, two unlikely allies united by common goals fueled by passion for justice. Little did they know how powerful their efforts would become, a force capable enough not only transforming lives but also reshaping institutional culture forever. A new era. As the weeks progressed at St. Mary's General Hospital, Angela Parker found herself at a crossroads. The challenges she faced were mounting, but so was her resolve to make a difference. Each day brought new tests of her character, yet with every encounter, she grew stronger and more determined. The support from patients like Thomas Edwards had become a lifeline, and their conversation sparked a fire within her that she had never anticipated. One morning, as Angela prepared for her shift, she received a text from Thomas. "Let's meet in the cafeteria during your break. I have an idea." The message sent a thrill of anticipation through her. She had been eager to discuss their plans for change and how they could leverage Thomas's connections to address the issues plaguing the hospital. When the clock struck noon, Angela made her way to the cafeteria, her heart racing with excitement. She spotted Thomas sitting at a corner table, his expression serious yet hopeful. As she approached, he gestured for her to sit down. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, leaning forward earnestly. "I've been thinking about how we can bring attention to the culture here, how it affects not just you but everyone who works here." Angela nodded eagerly, feeling the weight of their shared mission pressing down on her shoulders. "I've been feeling it too. The way Dr. Greaves treats me is just one example of a much larger problem." Thomas leaned back thoughtfully. "What if we organized a meeting with the hospital board? I can use my connections to get us in front of them." Angela's eyes widened in surprise. "You really think they'd listen?" "Absolutely," Thomas replied confidently. "But we need to present them with evidence, real stories from staff and patients that highlight the issues." Angela felt a surge of hope at his words. "That could work. We could gather testimonials from other staff members who have faced similar discrimination or exclusion." With renewed energy, they began brainstorming how to approach their plan. They would create a safe space for employees to share their experiences without fear of retaliation, a confidential forum where they could voice their concerns and stories. Over the next few days, Angela and Thomas worked tirelessly to prepare for their meeting with the board. They reached out to colleagues discreetly, gathering testimonies and compiling data on workplace culture that highlighted the disparities in treatment based on race and gender. As they collected stories, Angela was both heartened and disheartened by what she heard. Many nurses shared experiences of feeling marginalized or belittled by their peers and supervisors, stories that echoed her own struggles but also demonstrated that she was not alone in this fight. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Angela dressed carefully in professional attire, determined to present herself as confidently as possible despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. Thomas stood beside her, offering silent support as they walked into the boardroom filled with senior staff members and hospital administrators. Dr. Greaves was seated at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he glanced up from his notes upon their entrance. "What is this about?" he asked curtly. Angela took a deep breath, stepping forward as Thomas gestured for her to begin. "Thank you for allowing us this opportunity," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We're here to discuss some serious concerns regarding workplace culture at St. Mary's General Hospital." Dr. Greaves raised an eyebrow but remained silent as Angela continued. "We've gathered testimonies from staff members who have experienced discrimination and exclusion within these walls," she stated firmly. "It's become increasingly clear that there is a pervasive culture that undermines our ability to provide quality care." As Angela spoke, she could see Dr. Greaves' expression hardening. He was clearly not pleased with where this conversation was heading. "Are you suggesting that we are not providing quality care?" he interjected sharply. "No," Angela replied quickly, maintaining eye contact with him despite his intimidating presence. "What I'm saying is that our ability to do so is compromised by an environment that fosters division rather than collaboration." The room fell silent as Angela shared specific examples from their collected testimonies, stories of nurses feeling belittled by supervisors, patients witnessing discriminatory behavior among staff members, and an overall atmosphere that stifled diversity and inclusion. As she spoke passionately about the need for change, Angela noticed some board members nodding in agreement while others exchanged uneasy glances. After she finished presenting their findings, Thomas stepped forward to support her claims further. He spoke about his own experiences as a patient in the hospital, how he had observed interactions between staff members that were concerning and unprofessional. Change begins with acknowledgement, Thomas said earnestly. We need to recognize these issues before we can address them effectively. Dr. Greaves shifted uncomfortably in his seat but remained silent. It was clear that he was struggling against the weight of their words. Finally, one of the board members, a woman named Dr. Elaine Carter, spoke up. Thank you both for bringing this to our attention, she said thoughtfully. It takes courage to address such difficult topics. Angela felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Perhaps this was the beginning of something significant. We need to take actionable steps toward creating a more inclusive environment, Dr. Carter continued, looking around at her colleagues before fixing her gaze back on Angela and Thomas. I propose we form a committee dedicated to addressing these concerns and implementing changes based on your feedback. The room erupted into murmurs as various board members began discussing potential next steps. It was clear that momentum had shifted in their favor. As they left the meeting room together afterward, Angela felt lighter than she had in weeks. I can't believe how well that went, she exclaimed excitedly, turning towards Thomas, who wore an equally triumphant smile. You did amazing, he replied sincerely, patting her shoulder reassuringly. In those moments filled with exhilaration, Angela realized just how far they had come since first stepping into St. Mary's General Hospital. Their journey had only just begun, but now it felt like they were finally on track towards making real change happen. Over time, Angela became more involved with the newly formed committee, working alongside Dr. Carter and other supportive staff members committed towards fostering inclusivity within St. Mary's while also addressing long-standing issues surrounding discrimination. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of their efforts began spreading throughout every department within St. Mary's General Hospital. The conversations once held behind closed doors were now taking place openly. Nurses began sharing experiences freely while advocating for one another without fear or hesitation. Little by little, the toxic culture that had once defined St. Mary's General Hospital started transforming into something far more welcoming, a place where diversity thrived rather than merely tolerated. And amidst all this change, Angela Parker stood tall, knowing deep down inside she had played an integral role in shaping its future. With each passing day, she felt empowered not only by herself but also by those around her who believed wholeheartedly in creating better opportunities for everyone regardless of race or background. Together, they were building bridges instead of walls, proving that even amidst adversity, change was possible when driven by passion, courage, determination. As Angela reflected on everything they had accomplished thus far, it became abundantly clear, sometimes, the most powerful transformations begin with one voice daring enough to speak up against injustice.